Shadow Slave. By Guiltythree. Chapter 1287, Blissful Ignorance. Sunny slept like a baby. There were no nightmares haunting his dreams, and when he woke up, his heart felt strangely at peace. He remained motionless for a while, feeling the warmth of Nef's hand resting on the crown of his head. The ketch was moving swiftly across the water, carried by both the wind and the current, and the world around them was dark. It was already night. I overslept. Nephi should have woken him up. Had she gotten any rest herself? Turning his head slightly, Sunny looked up and saw her elegant jawline. She was leaning on the wooden side of the ketch, her eyes closed. Her breathing was slow and deep. She was fast asleep. So, no one was keeping watch. Don't be upset with the lady, my lord. Sunny flinched slightly and glanced at the stern of the boat, where Anank was still sitting, holding lightly to the steering oar. Her dark mantle was of the same color as the night sky, making it hard to discern where its folds ended, and the night began. You both needed rest. Sunny felt very comfortable laying on Nef's lap, but he had to sit up with a reluctant sigh. Rubbing his eyes, he looked at his shadows, which were all but invisible in the darkness. None of them showed any sign of being concerned, so he judged that the old woman had not tried anything strange while they slept. Even though it would take a few more days for his reserves of essence to be fully replenished, they were not dry anymore. Due to the shroud of dusk, he also felt rested and refreshed. However, he was slightly hungry. Sunny hesitated for a few moments, and then asked, "Say, you wouldn't happen to have more of those little pies?" Anank smiled. "There should be a few left in the box." "Eat well, my lord. I made them with care." Sunny noted that the wooden box was not a memory that created food, but instead a storage memory that helped keep supplies fresh. Everything inside must have been prepared by Anank in anticipation of meeting the children of Weaver. Opening the lid, he discovered a few leftover pies, as well as more fruit and a couple other simple dishes, all perfectly fresh and preserved. It smelled so wonderful that he remained motionless for a moment, enjoying the fragrance. Misunderstanding his hesitation, the old woman spoke. "I'm sorry that I can't offer you more, my lord. It is not easy for me to procure fruit and flour these days. I hope you are not too disappointed." Sunny looked at her and smiled. "What are you talking about, grandmother? I once ate nothing but rotten devil meat for an entire month. This is nothing short of a feast." To illustrate his point, he picked up one of the pies and greedily pushed it into his mouth. Anank tilted her head a little. "Do people still suffer from hunger in the future?" Sunny chewed for a long time before answering. The old woman clearly believed that the future was some kind of a paradise that she and the other followers of Weaver helped create. He didn't want to hurt her feelings. He shrugged. "Smart people don't." "Ah. But I am not too smart myself, sadly. At least not all the time." Then, a sudden thought flashed through his mind. Sunny looked at Anank carefully, then asked, "But what about you, grandmother? Have you eaten anything?" She was so thin and frail that he had mistaken her for a corpse not too long ago. However, she had only offered the food to them, not partaking in it herself. Anank gently shook her head. "This body of mine does not get hungry often. I'll just catch some fish later." Sunny frowned, then took out the rest of the pies and walked over to the steering oar, offering them to her. "No, that won't do. Please eat some, too. Otherwise, my teacher will give me a beating once I come back home." Teacher Julius would indeed be beside himself if he learned that Sunny stuffed his belly while an elderly woman starved herself nearby. Even if that woman was just a nightmare inhabitant. More than that, just what kind of fish was she going to catch in the great river? Anank hesitated a little, then took one of the pies with a shaking hand and smiled. "Thank you, my lord. That is enough." When he went back to the box, Nef stirred slightly and opened her eyes. She stared at her empty lap for a few moments, then looked at Sunny and blinked a couple of times. Finally, she sniffed the air and turned to the wooden box, guided by the enticing fragrance of the freshly cooked food. Her eyes glistened. The two of them had a scrumptious meal while Anank slowly ate her single pie. The atmosphere inside the ketch was strangely peaceful. It was as though they were sailing on a calm lake instead of the deadly expanse of the great river, where all kinds of terrifying creatures dwelled. The water was glowing with soft opalescence, while the sky was impenetrably black. The beautiful vista of the world hidden within the tomb of Ariel was as dreamlike and mystical as ever. As Sunny looked at the surface of the water, he suddenly saw its light grow dim. There was a vast, inconceivable shadow moving somewhere unfathomably deep, below them, blocking off the radiance of the drowned suns with its endless expanse. For a few moments, a bleak darkness enveloped the entire span of the great river around the ketch, and then indifferently moved on. He shivered and looked at Anank, terror hiding in his lightless eyes. The old woman calmly held the steering oar as she smiled. "Don't worry, my lord. They can't sense us." Sunny hesitated for a while, wondering if he should ask who the they she spoke of were. In the end, he remained silent. There were things that a person was better off not knowing. Sunny was not sure if he could allow himself the luxury of ignorance. But he decided to enjoy being ignorant still, at least for today. Chapter 1288, King Among Beasts. There were still a lot of questions Sunny wanted to ask Anank, and a lot he needed to learn. But, surrounded by the silent darkness of the night, he simply listened to the gentle sound of water splashing against the hull of the swift ketch and stared at the glowing expanse of the great river without saying a word. A lot had happened yesterday. Gods! Was it really just a day ago that he had fought the Azure Serpent? The fearsome battle, the frantic escape from the Dark Island, there had not been a single moment of peace for him to settle himself and contemplate these matters yet. It feels like a dream. He had really done it. He had killed a great beast. Of course, it was partly due to the blessing of Nef's soul flame, as well as the fact that the Azure Serpent had been severely weakened. And yet, was there another master in the world who could boast the same feat? Surely not. Had there ever been? Sunny shifted uncomfortably, afraid that the incredible achievement would go to his head. He almost wished to hear the biting remarks of the Sin of Solace, who never missed a chance to bring him down. The bastard was somewhere nearby, but kept out of sight. He could feel the faint presence of the hateful wraith at the edges of his consciousness. Nevertheless, it was a fact, Sunny had indeed slain the Azure Serpent. Darren of the Twilight Sea. What an unusual name for a nightmare creature. After observing the mad beast for so long and even assuming its form, Sunny was certain that there was something special about the ferocious abomination. Now, after learning its name, he came to strongly suspect that the Azure Serpent was not an abomination at all. Or at least had not always been one. Was the old snake actually a human once? Humans were all considered to be beasts by the spell, after all. A sovereign, for example, could be called a supreme beast. So what would happen if a sovereign succumbed to corruption? Looking at the radiant expanse of the great river, Sunny felt restless. There might be a simple way to find out. Closing his eyes, he dove into his soul sea. It was exactly the same as it had been before, with 5 black suns looming above the still water. Only now, after learning the truth of how the world of the great river had been created, he perceived it in a somewhat new light. A legion of shadows stood motionless in the silent darkness. Sunny still remembered the time when he could count the lifeless shadows with one hand, but there were so many of them now. Thousands. Have I really killed that many? Of course, he had. From the forgotten shore to the tomb of Ariel, Sunny had lived a life of slaughter. Even if it had not been of his own volition. The numbers had especially swelled during the southern campaign, where he had been constantly surrounded by vast hordes of rampant nightmare creatures. Most of the shadows were abominations, the Mountain King, the formless shadow of the unborn spawn of the vile thieving bird, the Forsaken Knight, the Mordant Mimic, the terror of LO-49, the mountainous titan Goliath. But there were plenty of humans, too. The nameless old slaver, Harper, Haruz, Castor, Pierce, the Red Priest, the War Maidens, the soldiers of the Ivory City, Knight Amaran, and the many awakened of the great clans he had killed in East Antarctica, Saint Dire Fong. And many more. There was also Salvain. 2 of her, actually, one that he had slain on the Chained Island, and the other he had slain in the Kingdom of Hope. Sunny felt bizarre every time he saw them. But he was looking for someone else right now. He first guessed that his suspicion was right after noticing that there was no gargantuan shape of a great serpent among the shadows. And then, he finally saw him. Darren of the Twilight Sea. The Azure Serpent had, indeed, been a human once. There, in the darkness, stood the shadow of a handsome man with strong facial features and fierce, downturned eyebrows. He was tall and imposing, with broad shoulders and a strong-willed, angular face. His hair was arranged in a long braid, and he wore an archaic robe that seemed both simple and regal. The Azure Serpent. He really was a human. Sunny froze, looking at the silent shadow. His heart was in turmoil. This was the first time he had seen a human who had succumbed to corruption. And not any human, at that, a proud and mighty sovereign, an exalted being of the supreme rank. Even Sylvain, who had spent thousands of years being tormented by the Wormvine, never gave up her humanity. Who was King Darren? Why had he come to the tomb of Ariel? How had he ended up losing himself in the madness and turning into an abomination, becoming no different from a mindless beast? Would Sunny end up the same, one day? A deep frown appeared on his face. Corruption. Sunny had not really faced corruption yet, only the result of corruption, those frenzied fiends humans of the waking world called nightmare creatures. However, he felt that if his power continued to grow, he would come into contact with it eventually. Perhaps even inevitably. Troubling. He glanced at the shadow of Darren one last time, hesitated, and then said quietly, "Find peace within me, old snake. Your nightmare is over." The Azure Serpent had been a terrible enemy, but he had also protected Sunny and Nephi's from the other horrors of the Great River. They wouldn't have been able to enjoy the blissful month on the Dark Island if not for his madness, hunger, and ferociousness. Sunny had learned a lot from the Great Serpent, as well. With a sigh, he turned away and walked to stand between the 5 black suns. There was still something he needed to see. Sunny had received a memory after killing the corrupted sovereign, after all. His first memory of the supreme rank. Well. His first memory of the supreme rank that he had actually earned, as opposed to mysteriously receiving it out of nowhere. Summoning the runes, Sunny found the unfamiliar string of them and read, Memory, Crown of Twilight. Memory rank, Supreme. Memory tier, I, Memory type, Tool.